This is Scott Roberts from the University of Maryland for OpenPSYC, and what I'd like to talk to you about are digital distractions. The presence of phones and laptops in our classrooms is becoming a bigger and bigger topic for a conversation between instructors and students, and even between instructors at teaching conferences nationwide. And when I have this conversation with my students, I like to start by telling them something about themselves that comes across a little harsh, which is that your brain is inherently limited. Now, it's actually limited in a really good way, in that our brains have evolved to support incredibly complex and advanced cognition. But in order to do that, we need to be able to focus our resources to the task at hand. And so our brain is limited in the sense that when we engage in one thing with a great deal of effort and resource, then it is incapable of doing other things at the same time. Now, if you got to this video through our OpenPSYC page on digital distractions, you have already watched that video on the color changing card trick. And it's a great fun example of what in psychology we call unintentional blindness. And what we mean by this, and what the research demonstrates, is when we focus our attention on one thing, we almost literally go blind to the other things going on. So while you were really focused on those cards, you may have failed to even see obvious changes that otherwise your brain might have picked up. Now, of course, if I had told you to watch that video and look for other changes in the background, then you would be much more likely to notice those right away. And so in some of the original research, and you may have even seen videos where people are bouncing basketballs and participants are trying to count the number of times one team passes to another, a gorilla walks into the middle of the group, beats his chest, and walks out. And most people don't even see it. So we quite literally go blind to the things that we're not paying attention to. And so our brain is doing its best to decide what needs the resources, and the rest we can ignore. Now, the problem with our sort of modern lives is that we're very accustomed to attempting to do many different things at one time. And when you ask students and adults, many consider themselves to be quite good multitaskers. Well, the research is pretty clear on this. You are not an exceptional multitasker. In fact, in one carefully controlled study, only about 2.5% of undergraduates were able to do two cognitive tasks at the same time without performance deficits in both tasks. And I know you're probably thinking, sure, I'm one of the 2.5%. Well, no, statistically you're not. So the truth is that none of us are really that good at doing many different things at the same time. And so researchers have looked at this not just in laboratories, but actually in classrooms. So in one classic study by Hembrook and Gay in 2003, they went into a classroom that had sections that were divided up, and they randomly assigned them to either continue to use their laptops as they were, or they were told to put away their laptops for that day. And then they were given a pop quiz at the end of that class meeting. So what effect did their ability to use their laptops have on their performance? Well, what they found was that the students who used a laptop were significantly outperformed by those that were told to put it away. Why is it that the students that didn't have access to a laptop did so much better? Well, one of the other really important findings here was not just the lower quiz scores with laptops, but also they asked the students what they were doing with those laptops. And what they found was that even if they were using the laptops to view class-relevant content, it didn't improve their performance. So clearly there was something going on about the device itself that was detracting from their performance on that quiz. Well, we were interested in looking at this ourselves, and so this is an actual picture from a Psych 100 section with 150 students in it. You can see the sort of all of the laptop screens in the room. And on this day, we presented new information on sensation perception. In the front of the room is my colleague, Dr. Ryan Curtis, and fellow contributor to OpenPSYC. And at the end of that meeting, we used these response clickers to give them some surprise quiz questions on the new information that we had presented. And then we also used those devices to ask students what they had been doing during the class meeting. And the results were consistent and clear, that the more students reported using their phone or their laptop, the worse they did on that 5-question quiz. And you can see that on average, it's the difference between about a 60% and an 85%. So we're talking about meaningful differences in learning based on whether or not students were using their phones or their laptops. Now, it's also interesting to notice that we asked them whether or not they had been doodling, and that had there were no differences in performance associated with whether or not they were drawing, which surprised us because as instructors we walk around and we sometimes see the kinds of elaborate drawings that students are doing in their seats. But it's also important to note that here we're just looking at a correlation, right? We didn't assign students to use those devices. So in the following semester, we did exactly that. And just like the study earlier that we cited, we randomly told one of the two classes to put all their devices away. And what we found is on a difficult question on new information that we presented, the entire class that was told to use only paper to take notes did much better as a class on that question than those that had the tech option. And it's important to note that the data from the class with the tech option, not all of those students were even using those technological devices. So if we took them out of the equation, the average would be even lower. So now we're starting to see a little bit more along the lines of causal evidence that there's something about having those devices present in the classroom that is causing a change in the learning that takes place. Now, of course, many students, and myself included, would say that I prefer to take notes on a laptop, that I do better on those notes. Well, a very recent study looked at exactly that, and they randomly assigned students to use laptops or take notes by hand. And one of the first findings that came out of this study was that when students use laptops, they write nearly twice as many words, and those words contain nearly twice as much verbatim quotes from the presentation they're taking notes on. So clearly, students are faster at taking notes on a laptop, and that speed allows them to type exactly what that speaker said. Well, then the question is, does that actually help performance? So what they did in their second study was participants all watched one of 5 15-minute TED Talks. All right, so these are very similar to a class meeting where there's new information that they have never heard before. Then they were randomly assigned to one of 3 groups. So one group was told to watch this presentation and take notes by hand. Another group was told to take notes using their laptop. And a third group was told to take notes using the laptop, but they were given the explicit instructions not to transcribe. They were told that studies have shown that people that take notes on laptops tend to just type what the speaker's saying, and they were warned not to do that. Then, after watching this presentation and taking notes on it, they were given a number of surveys that added up to about 30 minutes worth of distractor tasks to give some time between when they saw the presentation and when they were given a test on what they had learned. Now, there were a number of findings that came from this study, but I think the most important and relevant to our conversation here is they looked at conceptual learning. And what you see here are z-scores, meaning this is sort of how students did relative to the average student. And what you can see is that the group that took notes by hand significantly outperformed both groups that had laptops. And interestingly, there was no difference between the normal laptop and the laptop with a warning in terms of transcribing. That even when they were told not to just write down what the speaker says, they tended to type just as many words, and just as much of those words were exact quotes from the speaker. And so I think that the take-home message from this study, when they look at the amount that people are putting down in terms of notes and the quality of their learning, is that the more you write, the less you come to understand. So there's actually something to be said for taking notes by hand. It forces you to actually think about what the speaker's saying instead of simply typing it down as quickly as you can. So while we might prefer to take notes on our laptops, there's some solid evidence here that the quality of those notes, and therefore the quality of our learning, is significantly less than if we had taken the notes by hand. Now, finally, another argument that ultimately comes up here in this conversation is, all right, fine, so individuals have to make informed decisions. If students want to text in class, or they want to take notes on their laptop, or even watch a movie or play video games, then that's up to them. It's their learning that suffers. But I think it's important to at least consider that maybe it's not that simple. And this relates to what Diane Sieber was quoted as sort of calling the cone of distraction. And the way I put it to students or instructors is, if you were up in front of the room giving a presentation and 2 students in the middle of the room were having a conversation with each other loud enough that you could hear it, would you just ignore it and say to yourself, well, it's their choice not to learn, so they're welcome to do that? Probably not. More likely you would say, no, I would ask them to stop or leave, because their conversation isn't just inhibiting their learning, it's inhibiting the learning of those around them. It's making it hard to pay attention. Well, the same point can be made for digital distractions, especially those on a laptop, but even what someone's doing on a cell phone. And so when one student suddenly starts to do something, bring up pictures, bring up a movie, I've even seen someone video chat, it's not just that student that's being distracted, but all of the students within a range behind them that can see that screen. So we have to consider that allowing devices in our classrooms might not just be harming the student that chooses to use it irresponsibly, but any student who can see what they're doing. I think it's important to close by saying that technology isn't evil, and these devices aren't evil. And a lot of instructors have found really creative and engaging ways to incorporate them in a classroom experience that advances learning. Our hope is that you'll use the research to inform your decisions about when to use them, how to use them, and when to just put them away and take out a pencil.